Evening, everyone. I'm Mark Ryan. I'm the Norwood Airport Commission Chairman, and with me tonight is Russ McGuire, the Airport Manager, Mark Goodrich from our engineering firm, Du Bois & King, Guy Ruel, Engineering Consultant, Du Bois & King, and Norwood Airport Commission member John Cochran is also here with us. I want to recognize two FAA officials, Lisa Lesperance and Michelle Ritchie, and plus our traffic control tower, Pat Fahey. So welcome to everyone tonight. This is the public meeting for the technical plan, master plan update for the Norwood Airport. The purpose of the technical master plan update is to update the airport's master plan. Specifically, the TMPU seeks to define Norwood Airport's current conditions while identifying capital improvement needs consistent with the airport's mission statement. Key issues tied to proposed airport improvements will also be identified in light of current and future aviation demand. A couple things I want to go through some ground rules before we start this. First of all, I ask everyone to turn off their electronic device so there's no unnecessary interruptions. We have a sign-in sheet. We ask everyone to sign in for this meeting, just so we have a record of attendance here. We also have handouts of the presentation that Guy Ruel and Mark Goodrich will be providing tonight. Guy's going to go through his presentation on the technical master plan update. We ask you all to hold your questions to the end. So with that said, you have the handout there with Du Bois & King's presentation. So be sure to keep notes so when we finish, you can ask some questions and we'll try to answer them. When we do get to the answering questions, when you're called upon to speak, please provide your name for the record and your address. We want everyone to be able to participate. We don't have too big of a crowd, so we ask you to keep your questions to about 5 minutes. And if we have to go back to you, that's fine. But we just want everyone to be able to participate here. After tonight, the NAC and Du Bois & King will take your comments under advisement. But we also want you to go home and think about what you saw tonight and read over this pamphlet provided tonight. And we will accept comments through email to Russ McGuire, the airport manager, till Friday, May 10th. And his email is rmaguire, that's rmaguire@norwoodma.gov. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Guy Ruel to lead us through the presentation.
Great. Well, thank you, Mark. And welcome, everybody. I appreciate everybody coming. It's a little smaller crowd than we had expected, but nonetheless, it is what it is. The purpose, if we could, we'll go to the agenda tonight. Really what our purpose is to explain and go through what we've already preliminarily worked on for quite some time. It's been about a year. We've worked through a technical master plan update. And why we use the word technical is a master plan usually will go through many, many elements of an overall master plan. This particular master plan here at Norwood, what we found was there was some change, but it wasn't, in some areas it really didn't require a need for us to go through the entire master plan. So just to streamline and keep it cost effective and really focus it on the areas that need to be focused on, the word technical is put before it, and so it's considered a technical master plan update. Tonight we're going to talk about the actual technical master plan update, why there was a purpose and a need to conduct this review. So we're going to go through that. Then I'm going to go into the sections specific, those technical sections of the master plan that we went into and we went through and we reviewed so that we could then come up with some alternatives, and those alternatives drove some changes that potentially could happen for the airport in the interest of safety, revenue, and operational expense reduction. Those were kind of the goals. Then we're going to talk about next steps after we go through the section reviews, and as Mr. Ryan had mentioned, then we'll go into a question and answer period. So again, you do have handouts. Write down your questions. I've worked with the FAA for a while. They know how I love questions at the end, so please have them ready. We really want your feedback. We want your comments. We want your questions so that we can, if appropriate, and if we're able to incorporate them into the master plan. So we could go to the next slide. So let's talk about the purpose and need. First and foremost, the previous master plan had not been, it's been since 2007. And I put that up there for many reasons. One, though, I want to stress, does anybody remember what happened the next year? I think we had a financial crash. And the industry, the aviation industry, really took a very hard hit. Why do I say that? Well, in that master plan update of 2007, there was a section called the forecasting section. In that forecasting section, we forecasted, the aircraft airport use. We looked at, how many aircraft, how many operations they were planning to have over a 30 or 20-year planning period. And they were looking, with that, drove a lot of other things. Well, then 2008 happened, right when this master plan was pretty much accepted by the FAA to move forward. And so we went through, and we'll talk about the validation that we did. We didn't do a forecasting update. We validated really a trend line of where we should have been had we not crashed, in lieu of doing a forecast update. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Some next bullet really says that the design aircraft has remained the same. Why is that important for the public? I've done a lot of these master plan updates or work on airports, and most people are concerned. Is they're going to be bringing in much larger aircraft? There's going to be a huge change to the airport. And I want to tell you the answer to that is no. The answer is that the design aircraft, which is the Falcon 7X, was that design aircraft in 2007 and was planned for a 20-year planning period to be that aircraft. Well, it turns out that it will remain the same. So when it comes to the use of the aircraft by a design aircraft, then that's not going to change. This master plan update, even though there was a crash in 2008 and the industry took a huge hit, the airport's got some really unique opportunities. And one of the purposes of this master plan update was to really explore some unique opportunities to not only save money for the airport, so it could be a little bit more sustainable, but at the same time, why not look at opportunities to increase revenues? So we spent a lot of effort, a lot of time. We put a lot of effort and time into evaluating cost-saving measures, but also how can we generate revenue, more revenue. You save money and increase revenue, doesn't that balance sheet change? So we really took a hard look at that, and we spent some time. We also wanted to resolve some non-standard issues. There are folks in the room that realize that there are some taxiway issues and taxi lane issues with the airport. And so, loud and clear, the FAA said in this particular review, we need to really focus on that. And the Airport Commission and the airport manager took that to heart, put us to task, and so we really took a long look. And you're going to see 4 or 5 slides here, which are in the slideshow. They will be up on the big screen. We may have to dim the lights a little bit, and it's like high school, the ones that don't want to be picked sit in the back of the room, and there's not a lot in the front, so it might be a little difficult to see. But I've got some large bullets to summarize the slide, and I'm going to take some time on those so we can talk about how we are proposing to resolve those non-standard issues. So we'll talk about that as well. And finally, we wanted to develop some alternatives for the airport that will, in 20 years, put the airport in a place where it's much more sustainable and much more usable for the flying public. So we go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about the master plan update itself. Technical master plan update was, we really broke it into 5 very specific sections. Number 1, it was an overview. We took a look at where the airport is, where it was in 2007 compared to where it is today. Which, by the way, as Mark had mentioned, the plan is to take your comments, incorporate them, if appropriate, into the draft master plan, technical master plan update, and to get it up on the city's website as early as, within the next 14 days, so that folks can start seeing the draft. And we're going to put draft on it because the master plan is not completed and finalized until the FAA has reviewed it and has accepted it. Okay, they won't approve it, but they'll accept it. Is that correct?
Yes, we'll accept the study, approve the.
That's right. So, and you'll be able to see the actual document within the next 14 days on the website that Russ gives us, and we'll make sure it's posted to you folks. Okay. So we did an overview. We wanted to look at the current situation of the airport. You know, it's so easy for a fresh set of eyes like myself to come into an airport and look around and say, hey, this is interesting, that's interesting, or great job here, or room for efficiencies over here. So we did an overview. We then also went in and we took the operations, and I'm going to put a slide up, and I just want to temper your expectations now. The slide is all about validating what the master plan of 2007 said, where they said the airport would be for as far as operations are concerned, things of that nature. And because of the economic downturn of 08, I took a snapshot and said, well, this is where they forecasted in 2018, in 2019 where it should be. Where are we really? And we've got a slide that will show a comparison there for folks so they can see that. So we looked at aviation operations, we validated that, and we compared it to the forecasted levels where they should be so you can have an understanding. We then went into looking at operations and comparisons. We then went into the facilities section. What facilities are currently in place, what facilities really should the airport have in play, and which leads us into the next section we'll talk about, which is going to be the bulk of our conversation tonight, the alternatives that will, again, if accepted by the FAA, will be then driven into a financial plan and an implementation plan over the next, 1 to 5 to 10 years, the capital improvement plan. Okay. So under the overview section, section 1 of the document, again, you'll see the next couple of weeks on the website. The first thing we went into was we looked at we just put an introduction, but we looked at a little bit of history. We wanted to look at the history of the airport. A lot of that was in the previous master plan, but there were some other things. We really started asking some good questions. We asked airport users. We talked to many different business owners, and allowed us an opportunity to get an interesting perspective of the airport history. And we validated some things that maybe needed to be updated. So we did that. Went into a background, then we looked at the regional setting and the land use. The regional setting, in essence, the airport is a reliever airport for Boston. And so we looked at the regional setting and how the airport's currently being used. We brought in a really good land use specialist, and there were some areas that, frankly, other master plans just didn't consider. And this is a person that really gets involved, not only land use, but constraints, natural constraints, floodplain. We just really wanted to document these things because, frankly, the airport, which is very well constructed, has some constraints. And in that section, you will see the discussion about floodplains. You'll see discussions about water table levels and things that I look back at many of the master plans for the airport, and they just hadn't been considered. So we have those, we've captured those, because it really draws the picture about why the airport really has its constructed as it is today. The natural and physical constraints, some of the physical constraints, of course, are, and I'll just give one example. I think there's a golf course just north of the airfield, and which is a physical constraint for the airport right now if the airport wanted to grow, and in size. So we will talk about that. And lastly, we go into the overview opportunities. So go to the next slide, please. So this is the first one that I wanted to put up because I felt it is section 2. It's the validation of operations, which in the document itself you'll see is many pages. However, really, I wanted to show and reduce to everybody, deduce it to based aircraft. Now, let me explain this. It says it's a minus 32%, okay, based aircraft. But I want to explain that the forecasted data that we use to compare, in the forecast of the 2007 master plan said that by this year, you will have this many based aircraft. And in fact, there are two things that affected Norwood in this case. One, although we're rebounding from the recession, some of the based aircraft had changed. Since 2007, the FAA has changed its way that it documents based aircraft, and so airport operators have to go in, buy tail number, and actually put things in. We found, and Russ found, that a lot of the aircraft, the based aircraft, were, well, for lack of a better terms, maybe they were based at Norwood, but they're also based at another airport. And when you validate that and you get a true reading of what the based aircraft number are, that impacted that number. So, you know, with the forecasted levels, and then throw the FAA changing, and I think it was 2011, I think, is when they went to based aircraft. The document, it shows that there's a 32% decrease in based aircraft. The aircraft apron parking demand has changed. There was a change in some of the geometry of the airport, working with the FAA, and the airport lost some parking area just a few years back. Some of the tie downs for airplanes had to go away, and so that didn't impact. That also impacted the airport. The aircraft flight, the actual operations decreased. Now, this is in part because of the the economic downturn, and again, compared to where it should have been with the forecast, which was, in my reading, was a little aggressive. The 07 forecast was a little aggressive, but nonetheless, it's a little less. The actual runway operational data, what that means is the use of each runway, and we worked a lot. Thank you for at ATC, our traffic control, worked with us. We gathered the data from them, and what we found was the use of the what was supposed to be this amount of operations per runway. We're down a little bit. So, and lastly, fuel sales. Fuel sales were impacted, not only the forecast level, but fuel prices rose significantly during the economic downturn. They've come down a little bit, but nonetheless, it's still an impact on operations, and there's been a decrease in fuel sales. So, we then went into the facility section. And I know it's a very busy page, but some things that we looked at were this. First of all, just the airport's design standard, the airport reference standard, is what's called a B2, and that's a design standard the FAA has, and it's in their documents, and we use it to design airports. And it triggers a lot of things: runway lengths, widths, and also taxiway widths, and safety areas, and taxi lanes, which we're going to talk about in a few minutes. And I just threw the numbers up there for everybody, because B2 doesn't mean anything to many people, but the B and the 2 means basically that the airport is designed for aircraft with an approach speed of less than 121 knots and less than a wingspan of 79 knots. Why is that important? I put that up because a lot of concern sometimes in these master plan updates is that we're going to have 747s coming in. And just, this is not the case at this airport. This airport is just not capable for that type of airplane. So it's designed in this way. The facilities we looked at, and the red means these are the areas that we're really focusing on these slides, and the others you will not see in future slides, but I just want to talk about them briefly. We looked at the safety areas. That's the ends of the runway where there's weight-bearing overrun and underrun of the runway. It turns out since the last master plan, this safety area has been improved. The airport did a good job. It's fixed. We're good to go. We're going to talk about, though, the longer runway, the main runway, the primary runway, 1735, and actually paving the safety areas. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. For those non-aviation folks in the room, the word primary surface area may not make a lot of sense, but we've got a slide. We've got them in your handouts. We'll talk about it. And the reason why we spent time on this is because the airport needs to generate revenue. It needs to also house some airplanes. And there's a lot of airplanes that are just sitting out in the weather, and a lot of people like to have their plane out of the element. So we focused on that, and it's in red. We're going to have a slide, and we'll talk about that. The precision approach system, the airport, the FAA is not really, they do in special circumstances, but not in the business of putting in precision approaches anymore, which is called an instrument landing system. So there was talk about this. There were studies and more studies and other studies, and it was found that this particular airport it's not in the foreseeable future to have an instrument landing system. So we're not going to have a slide on that. Taxiway Charlie, there's a taxiway, and you'll see the slide, is a little bit misaligned, if you will. It's got some geometry issues, some safety issues as it relates to airplanes crossing the runway right off of an apron, and we're going to talk about that. We have a slide for that. The taxi lane system. this really was a big focus point for us. We do realize that there's 3 taxi lanes, actually 4 technically, but there's 3 that were taking airplanes between hangars. There's obstructions, and we wanted to, we heard the FAA wanted us to focus on this. They tasked the airport to do that. So we're going to spend some time on that. What we found, though, which we'll discuss tonight, is we found an opportunity where de-icing pads, glycol collection systems, where airplanes can now de-ice on the airport, we found some options for that. It's a revenue generator. It also increases the use of the airfield because airplanes can come in, utilize the airport in inclement weather, especially with cold weather. So we're going to talk about that.
No.
Oh. I was going to say that, young man, please hold your questions. There's also, we're going to talk about helicopter pads on the south end of the airfield. You know, there's some alternatives there we'll talk about. We reviewed the fuel farm, the aging fuel farm. By the way, there's a fuel farm on the airfield. It's you know, it's close to 30 some odd years old, and so in the near future or midterm future, there's going to need to be a solution for that. So we talk about that as well. The maintenance building, we just updated the master plan. We're not going to talk about it tonight, but there is a nice building it's still being retrofitted as we speak, but it's a beautiful building that was funded in part by MainDOT and others, so that's going to be in the document. An aircraft wash area, that's a revenue generating area. Commercial operators need to wash their airplanes, there's a requirement, and so we incorporated that. And other things. I will tell you, there's some land acquisition, fencing, and lastly, we do have, as the note says in the bottom, anything in red, there's alternatives that were developed, which is where we're going to focus next in the next slides. Okay. Next slide. I'm hoping this is viewable. Does anybody need to dim the lights a little bit more? Get a little washed out. It is in your slide. I can tell you in the master plan, when you get it, if you pull it up electronically, these are going to be high resolution, larger 11 by 17 documents that will be in the actual document. But when you pull the electronic version from offline, you'll really be able to zoom in and see some really good details. So I do apologize if the contrast is a little off. But the first alternative we came up with for the airfield is the paving of the safety areas. This airport has 300-foot safety areas on either end. Right now, they're grass, right, and you know, kind of a mix, but they're mostly grass, they're mowable. The issue is that the airport has seen some underruns and overruns. What that means is the airplanes land a little before the pavement, or they land too long for whatever the reason, and they overrun the airport, or the runway that they're on. This is the main runway, the north-south runway, and they go into the grass as well. Because the water table's so high, and because it's very moist, that you know, there is a need to have. Well, first of all, you have to have these safety areas in case the plane overruns and underruns. But right now they're not completely the standard. They won't support the weight of the design aircraft. So by paving these safety areas, it will enable airplanes, if they do underrun or overrun, to be able to be a little bit more assured. At least they'll meet FAA standards, and they'll have paved area that they'll be able to overrun and underrun on. So paved safety areas will be a part of this, and so that was one alternative. If we go to the next slide. Very difficult to see. So the next 2 slides I want to talk about. The kind of the what the FAA has around airports, which is called the primary surface area. It's an area really where you want to protect the runway and airplanes from running into things, okay, simply put. And right now, the airport has a what's called a primary surface area. And I'm going to go up here and point a little bit if I could. Again, high res, you'll be able to see it. Should I dim the lights, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me dim these a little bit. She showed me how to do this. No sleep. Is that better at all? A little better? Okay. So from the center of the runway, on either side of the airport right now, because the airport was considering to have an instrument landing system years ago, and what's called an ILS, which is an approach system that airplanes use to go from bad weather, and they're flying, to, I call them like the off-ramps, right? They're able to intercept and fly down to an altitude laterally also look outside and be on the center of the runway and be able to potentially land. That's the goal for instrument landing system, or for any instrument approach procedure. The instrument landing system, which is a precision approach, the FAA requires a 1,000-foot primary surface area. Why is that important? Well, and I hope you can you see it okay on the slide at least? Very difficult? Okay, let me just explain. So from 500 feet from the center line of the runway, right now, because it's 1,000 feet either side, there's an imaginary surface that comes up that the airspace wants protected for obstructions. Because this primary surface is so wide right now, it pushes the edge of that primary surface to here, and I know this is hard to see, and I apologize, I'm going to point up here. It points to an area that's very close to about 500 feet from the center line, about over here. And what it does is it doesn't allow you really to build any hangars on there's a DC-3 apron, there's a west apron, there are other aprons on the airport. We only gave you one example here. So the heights of these buildings are literally restricted to only about 12 feet in height. And there's really no way to construct any additional hangars. So if we go to the next slide, what we're proposing to the FAA, and if you go to the first slide first, if you could flip back, this would be easy to see, but you can see the heights of the buildings, only 12 feet. If you flip to the next slide, by decreasing the primary surface area to really only 500 feet in width, because that can be used for a GPS approach, which is what the FAA is happy to design now. Doesn't require any equipment on the ground. Now you've got a narrower primary surface area, which moves where this airspace starts, and you can see that the building heights now can be 30 and 40 feet in height. Not that they would be. My point is now you can build hangars in these areas, and again, from a plan view, you could see that they could build 6 hangars, 7 hangars, but this is only one apron. Maybe some hangars here, maybe some hangars in other parts of the airport. So it really gives them, and this is just a planning document, but it gives the airport the opportunity now to be able to build more hangars, which generates revenue, and now airplanes can be stored. So this is our alternative, the preferred alternative. And again, it'll be much easier to see when you can pull this thing up online. All right. Let's go to the next slide here. This is the current configuration of the taxiway. I'll go back up here and point it once again. The current configuration of the taxiway, as you come off the apron at the airport, is there's a taxiway that kind of comes through here at a kind of an odd angle, about a 30-degree angle from the crosswind runway. It also is right off the apron, and you cross the runway, and then you're going down through. What we're recommending is that this is realigned, so you have a full parallel taxiway for the crosswind runway that will cross in the right place, have the right geometry. And for the purposes of revenue generation, and because there's so many wetlands around the airport, we're recommending that, because this is already disturbed, this taxi lane, you just say goodbye to the taxi lane, really no permitting involved, but then a solar array can be installed. And the solar array could be grid-tied. And a grid-tied solar array, we recently did at the Rutland State Airport in Vermont. They commissioned the solar array in December of 2015, and it was built to the size that the airport has not had to pay a power bill since. There's so much energy generated from that solar array. It goes back to the power company. It credits all of their meters on the airfield. And then, of course, with the credited meter, that's just a reduction in your operating expenses. So the operating expenses at the airport, of course, there's many, one of which, one of the bigger ones, of course, is the power bill. So with the potential of realigning the taxiway, which makes sense anyway, it corrects a non-standard issue that we have over here with geometry, straightens it out, makes good sense, it's future-proofing, safety. The airport then has a full parallel taxiway, this runway I should say, but then you put the solar array and you can construct that and have that operating expense reduced greatly. So this is another alternative. Okay, this is where it, very sorry for this. This is very difficult to see. I'm glad I got good notes up here. Let me explain the next few slides that we want to talk about. The airport has 3 taxi lanes that go between a bunch of different buildings. And for those of everybody familiar with the airport, I know Chris, I know ATC is, I know the FAA is. You're familiar. Are you familiar with the airport, sir?
Yes.
You are. Okay, good. Sir, how about you in the back?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. So I hope you can understand this. So there's a taxi lane number 3 that's up when you're first coming down the main road, the airport road, and then there's a taxi lane 2 and a taxi lane 1. Okay. Right now, one of the major issues with the airfield is that with the size aircraft the airport is designed to be it's actually it would be unsafe to put the size aircraft that the airport has currently it's supposed to be designed for, down these taxi lanes, okay? What we've, it's a horrible color. I'm thinking about doing, let me just for a second see if I can zoom in on that, because it's very clear when I can zoom in. So just 1 second, please. Is that starting to get clearer?
Yeah.
Good. So I want to start with taxi lane 3. Screen is, okay. It is getting a little clearer. All right. So some things I want to point out, and it's true with each of these taxi lanes. We're going to talk about taxi lane 3. It's the one that's the most northern. They run east and west. And this taxi lane number 3, I want to point out some things. So 1, you'll see lines at the outside, the OFA, Object-Free Area. And then you've got a TSA, not the Transportation Safety Administration, but it's the Taxiway Safety Area. The FAA and the Object-Free Area is asking that for the design of the taxi lane that we have, they want to make sure that as airplanes are taxiing down the center of this taxi lane, they're not going to connect the wingtip with an obstruction. So in this particular case with the airport, this page right here, this first slide, really shows kind of the current conditions. And the current conditions, I'll try to slide over here if I could. Starting from the north-south taxi lane, this is taxi lane 3, you'll see that for the airport itself, for the taxi lane, right now, because of the width of this, it's only at a aircraft design group 1. But our goal, and this is what I was going to have Mark talk for a few seconds, the goal here is to get to an aircraft of design group 2, which is what we're looking to do. So Mark, would you like to talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. On our airport, we have a number of obstructions. About halfway down, we have some bollards, we have some fire hydrants, we have hangar doors that extend into, wow, that's bright. Hangar doors that extend into the operational area, and we need to resolve that. It's not only here, but it is on taxi lane 2 and taxi lane 1. Not as bad. However, the aircraft that do operate down here currently exceed those safety areas. It's an area that we're trying to resolve, but it's not easily resolved. The airport was built in the 1940s. This was long before we ever had any standards that the FAA had established for object-free areas. So it wasn't an issue at the time. It's now become an issue, but it's not easily resolved because there are leases on the airport that the airport does not own with buildings in it that we can't tear down to resolve these issues. We can't move bollards, we can't move buildings until those leases have, I guess, run out and we've been able to reobtain them, maybe move some buildings or change lease agreements. So this isn't our long-term plan. It's been looked at as a possible option for our capital improvement plan. 5 years from now, we may be able to obtain those the easements, but I think the easement's got 20 years left on it. It was a 100-year lease.
2047.
2047 is, if we allow the lease to run out, it's 2047. So we're looking at trying to buy out that lease. And in the meantime, we're stuck trying to resolve some of the issues. FAA does allow you, although not without permission, to reduce or restrict the aircraft that can go down there to a smaller wingspan, so we can serve somewhere between a B1 and a B2 aircraft. So it's forget the formula. But right now, 79-foot wingspan does not operate safely there, so we are restricted on the aircraft that can safely operate there.
Great, so we're going to go through 3 slides. Thank you, Mark. So that's a good baseline. Again, the goal is to get to an aircraft of design group 2, that's the size that can operate at the airport, ultimately, for all 3 of these taxi lanes. The first slide we're showing here is that Mark and his design team were able to, for taxi lane 3, which is, this is the furthest north taxi lane, we can fit in, you see the lines, we can fit in a taxi lane design group. This does say a 1, and for taxi lane 3, you can see that we can fit in a taxi lane design group 1 for this taxi lane. And then here's the kind of the T hangars that are here. We can also fit in, of course, a taxi lane design group 1 as well. So this is the first slide that we want to show you. Okay, so these do fit. It would there would be restricted taxi lanes. It still does not meet the goal of the airport. Again, we're looking for design group 2, a wider span that we can fit down each one of these taxi lanes. So the first alternative that we reviewed, we can fit design group 1. It still doesn't meet the need of the airport. So I'm going to go to the next slide, which is alternative number 2. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and so you can see the notes, and I'm going to zoom back in again. So in summary with the first one, just go back up to the slide, all 3 taxi lanes would fit between hangars. They don't necessarily meet the goal of the design group 2, but nonetheless, just looking at it from a wider span here, at all 3 of these, if you can see the mouse, yes you can, all 3 of these would have a design group 1, and so they'd be restricted taxi lanes. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide, our next alternative number 2, where taxi lane design group 3, which is up here, because of all of the obstructions and buildings, as Mark had mentioned, are going to remain for quite some time, would remain a design group 3. Design group 1, taxi lane 2 would also remain a design group 1. But in this alternative, what we decided to do is, because there's plenty of apron here, now I'm going to zoom in, because the only change is going to be this most southern taxi lane. Let me zoom in now. You can see that we can just encroach into the taxi, or the actual apron a little bit, and you'll see it's a much wider object-free area, which is 115 feet in width, and you could fit a taxi lane design group 2 for this. So this is, again, alternative number 2. The only change between alternative 1 is that we just encroach into the apron over here. The impacts, as you can see, is now we're starting to encroach into some tie downs that are there. So the airport would lose a couple of tie downs where airplanes can tie down. However, it does enable the larger aircraft, if they need to, they can maneuver down through there without fear of striking a wingtip. Okay. Alternative number 3. Well, once again, does taxi lane 3 and taxi lane 3 and 2 basically remain a design group 1. But as you can see, what we've done here is now we're talking about, let me zoom in, why do we need those 2 taxi lanes if in the long term, because this is where Mark was saying, sometimes you have to in the long term look at deconstructing buildings. And in fact, this building, this T hangar that we're looking at right here, is rather old, and it has some exposure. Airplanes have some exposure because there's many cases I don't think there's any doors on them, right? There's no doors, and it's getting old. And frankly, this building in the intermediate time period could just be removed. And now what you've got is as you can see with my mouse, a taxi lane that is a design group 2. The larger aircraft could taxi down through. They could access these hangars. And in addition to that, because there's plenty of design radius or turn radius here, the airport can then install a glycol collection system. Let me zoom in a little bit and slide this over. And a de-icing area for the airport where airplanes can now come in. They can de-ice. There's a collection system. It's good for revenue. It also, I talked to a couple of the different companies that do charter operations. And they said that Norwood Airport, without de-icing, there are times they won't even allow their aircraft to dispatch to the airfield because they need to be able to de-ice if need be. There's no de-icing at this point. So having a glycol collection system with this alternative would certainly meet that need. It's revenue generating, and now you've reduced the airfield just to 2 taxi lanes rather than 3, and but one of which does meet the design standards that the FAA has asked for taxi lanes. So, okay, let me go to just the 4th slide on this because the color is not that well, and I apologize, but I'm glad we're able to zoom in. The last alternative, which by the way, let me just zoom out here, is the preferred alternative. The preferred alternative, and I'm just going to stay up a little higher here now, and hopefully you guys can understand where we're going with this. The goal is to get to design group 2 taxi lanes. This alternative, the preferred alternative, meets that alternative. Now, how does that do that? Well, we already gave the solution for this one, but the taxi lane that's up on the north, number 3, would require, you can see right here, where this kind of encroaches into and crosses over an older building that sits there. We want to be respectful of this new building that's already been built so that it meets that need, but what it requires is the removal. There's some bollards that need to be removed. There's a few issues up in with this building up here, but again, it's a little older. This end goes away. Now you've got a design group 2 taxi lane here and here with glycol collection, and it meets what the FAA was looking for taxi lanes. Okay, so this is the preferred alternative for taxi lanes. Again, I'm a little embarrassed with the way the color and contrast is going, so I apologize, but again, within 10 days we'll have this up on the website. You guys will be able to zoom right in on these with good full color and context and contrast. So those are the 4 alternatives that we did spend a lot of time with our engineers putting together, and would be the preferred that we're putting them through. You go to the next slide.
I need the clicker.
Roger that. And I got to go back to full screen. So hold on a second. Okay. The helipads on the south side of the airfield. The Airport Commission had asked us to spend a little bit of time on this to look at. Right now, there are some helipads that sit, but they're right kind of in the middle of the taxi lane as you're going down through the air traffic control towers over here. There are some trees here that are kind of starting to restrict their view. We heard that loud and clear. That's in the plan to get those moved. But what happens is helicopters are getting staged through here, but they're very difficult. If one lands here I should say, and another one wants to land here, but this one needs to get put away, or they need to put another one out, it just becomes an issue for them. It doesn't flow very well. So the alternatives we came up with that we were asked to look at, and we did, and we believe it'll work, is to actually do some bump outs. Very similar to the north end of the airfield. The north end has kind of some helipads that are bumped out away from the apron. It allows them to put them away, and it doesn't really get the helicopters when they're staged or they're being recovered, don't necessarily get in the way. But on the south end, that's not the case. So this, we feel, would be very similar to the north end of the airfield. And in addition, if the room is right, we're going to have on the airport layout plan that this area here is reserved, if it will work, for hangar development. And we'll have that in there so these helicopters could either be put there, or we could use the hangars could be used for others. But again, the goal here is to separate the rotary wing from the fixed wing. And so this was an alternative that we looked at. We also, on the DC-3 area, the apron, the DC-3 apron was, again, we started this, just full disclosure, about a year ago. I think some circumstances may or may not have changed, but nonetheless, the DC-3 apron it was an area that we just had the engineers and the designers put for turn radius, things of that nature, setback from over here. There's kind of a fueling lane where a truck needs to come through from time to time because there's a fuel farm over here. we just set these back so that airplanes could be put in there. And commercial operators, Part 135 operators, require an actual wet wash once a year. So this enables, or has a place on the airfield that could, one, be away and be out of the way, I should say. They could wash, and then also the runoffs from this could be collected and separated, oil separators, things of that nature. Okay. Last slide. Another alternative is parking. Now, full disclosure, since the last master plan that was done, the last master plan talked about some improvements that needed to be done with the parking lot. The airport has since done that. And in fact, just for folks that don't know, the airport has seen some significant increases. In fact, MassDOT just did an economic impact study. And in that study, they found that the airport, over the last, I think it was a 15% increase in overall economic impact over the last 5 years. So I know I threw some slides up that kind of gave a doom and gloom compared to what the forecast actually was. The forecast was aggressive. The actual economic impact study showed that there was a 15% increase.
13, but we can round.
Okay,
to
13,
15.
thank you. Yeah, I was doing that from memory. So 13% increase over the last 5 years in economic impact. And what does that mean? There's like 459 direct and indirect jobs that the airport supports. And it also, there's is it $459 million a year is the actual economic impact for the airfield.
I think it's 50.
59 million.
Right. So we'll tell, that's 400 million is my payroll. I forgot about that. I'm just kidding. $59 million is the economic impact, and I know ranked very close to other airports that are in the region, like Plymouth and things of that nature. So the airport's performing quite well. Our strategies and goals was to decrease operating expenses, increase revenues, which will only the next time they do these economic impact studies. So right, you've done a good job. I looked at the study, and it really shows a good trend from before. So in the last master plan, they did talk about issues with the parking lot. Russ had done a great job. Those have been repaired. But some other alternatives that we looked at and we incorporated into the master plan is how do we increase the flow and use of the parking lot. It's a real bugger during a really busy day at the airport. The parking can be a concern. And so by having more parking spaces identified, that's good future-proofing. Other creative ideas such as, putting proposed solar canopies on the airfield to help with the bottom line with the operating expenses is another very creative idea. It's space that really is doing nothing, so you might as well put some canopies up there. So we would look at those, and we did. And I kind of put this on here because it wasn't in the last master plan. There's a proposed 7,200-foot hangar, which there's a pencil and ink change for the ALP, but it'll go on the actual airport layout plan when this master plan goes in, so that the public can see that this has been designated for that proposed hangar. So,
I'll just go back,
sure.
just that additional parking lot too, Guy, there. There's a new parking lot in a proposed building.
Correct.
Can you talk about that, please?
I sure can. Yeah, the proposed building, Jeff was supposed to send me some notes, so I'm wondering if maybe you could talk about the proposed building. I can talk about the actual parking. The proposed building itself would
Yeah,
be
so,
great, Mark.
so we recently received a grant from Mass DOT for $1.789 million to outfit the major Mark C. Welch Administration Building right here. Okay, and in addition, there's a parking lot proposed right behind that building there. And they'll provide access to the building, allow people who visit and want to enjoy the hill there, go there. The FAA tower can get some parking nearby. So that's going to be ongoing in the next few weeks. And then we also show a proposed restaurant-type business right here, which, if you're looking on here, would be right in here. It's about 3,700 square footprint. That's, in the future, no plans have really been put together or approved, but once again, we just wanted to put out as much as we can on what can happen down at the airport to improve the revenue stream down there and enhance the operations.
Great, thank you. Go to the next slide. So the last section, and then we're getting close to questions. So for the last section, what we wanted to do is outline just a kind of a general implementation and financial plan. So what is this, the overall, all the proposals that we had in red and the slides we gave, what does this look like for cost proposals? So the engineers looked through, we looked at the projects, we did some estimating. So the projects that are phased are short-term projects, which are from 2019 to 2023. There's intermediate term, which goes from 24 to 28, and then the long term is, there's about 10 years away. And that would go up to, to 2038. The prioritization, the way that we did it was safety first, said that before. Then it's all about revenue generation and cost reduction for the airfield. So safety is always first with the FAA. The 20-year capital improvement plan equates to about $27 million. Now, when you go into the financial implementation slide, I don't think it's on the next slide, is it, by chance?
No.
Did we put it?
No.
You'll see this, again, within 14 days, we'll have this up on the towns. Go to this section, and you'll be able to see the projects that we listed in red, the slides we gave you. We have them in order of short-term, intermediate, and long-term. You'll be able to see those. And then there's also, on the next page, it actually gives the dollar amount, what we're estimating. These are engineered estimates or opinions of probable costs, if you will. But the overall 20-year capital plan equated to about $27 million. And for those that, the funding for airports are 90% federal, which is through the Aviation Trust Fund. If you pay taxes, or you go on to, I should say, on an airplane, or you have air cargo with FedEx, or if you buy aviation fuel, those types of revenues go into this trust fund. And then MassDOT contributes 5%, and then there's a 5% local match, okay? The federal and state, if you equate that to that formula I just gave you, 27, 90% is federal, 5% of that would be state, and then the local match for that 5%. Over the next 20-year period, looks like a $6.7 million number.
The numbers don't quite work out to 95 and 5 because some of the projects are not AIP eligible.
Understood.
Or some are fully funded by MassDOT.
Understood. Yep. Next slide, please. So the next steps, and for contrast, I put that in blue. So again, as Mr. Ryan had said, we really want feedback. Please, please send your feedback into Russ. Send them to Russ. We're going to consolidate all those. In fact, all the questions that are going to come in, we will put into a single standing document. It will be part of the, kind of the addenda in the back of the master plan, so folks can see the comments that came in. We will incorporate them if we can. If they're just general comments, we'll accept your comments and thank you. We want to incorporate them, so we're going to receive them and incorporate when appropriate. The FAA is going to review, and it takes time to review this. Once they've reviewed it, they may have comments as well, and we'll respond to those comments. And then with the goal, of course, is for them to accept the overall master plan and approve a new airport layout. Okay. The airport then would, working with MassDOT and the FAA and with the airport's consulting engineer, would create a new capital plan for the 1 year, and then the 5 year, and then the longer period capital improvement plan. And that would be available, and that's always, I'm sure you always share those publicly, the capital plans. And then, of course, there's the implementation of the plan. Every year, even though it's a 5-year plan sometimes, every year the priorities may change because of FAA standards or the town's standards. But frankly, the implementation plan is one in which that allows the airport to logically and strategically follow so they can get these projects done. So if we could, next slide. With that, we would defer to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Guy. Before I open up for questions, Guy, just a couple of things.
Sure.
Back on section 4, Mark, if you could pull up those slides. We were showing some hangars on the west apron and the DC-3 ramp. Those,
Right there.
and I think Guy said it, these are just planning ideas. These aren't set in stone. These have not gone through any approval process with the Conservation Commission, or the Norwood Airport Commission, but it's just giving us kind of an idea, what if, you know, we went to that primary surface area of 500 feet, you're talking about height improvements on the buildings there. So those aren't set in stone.
Correct.
Right, those, okay.
Just to add to that, any project that would go on to the capital improvement plan follows a very regimented process, one of which, the master plan, if it's accepted by the FAA, then these are, in theory, projects that the FAA feels are airport improvement plan eligible, or i.e., another word is they could be fundable. Any project then goes from a planning stage to a actual design, goes through a preliminary design, a full permitting process. Sometimes it's NEPA, sometimes there's other permits. There's a regiment that we follow to make sure that, one, the FAA is okay with us moving forward, two, that it's going to meet the needs of the airport, and three, it's going to be permittable. So,
Thank you. One of the other things, you know, we talked about at the beginning, having written comments presented to Russ by Friday, May 10th. But you mentioned in your presentation the technical master plan update being 10 days from now, we'll get it up there. We can get it up there sooner on our website, right?
absolutely. Yes,
Right.
we absolutely can.
Yeah, that's going to be within a day or so. That's going to be
Correct.
presented to
written.
Russ, and it'll be on our website. So
Yeah, well, good point. So what I'll do is I'll defer to you guys. Whatever you guys would like to do, my thoughts were, if we're looking for comments for folks and we're going to incorporate them, we can incorporate them in as an addenda to the back of the master plan, at the technical master plan at the end. The draft, we want to make sure that the FAA gets it so they can start their review process, which will turn into a final process.
but the public can see the draft as well. And
Correct.
That's going to be on the website sooner than later.
It will. It'll be
Okay.
the end of this week, and we will make sure, Mark, that it's marked as draft, so that everybody knows it's a draft.
No.
Okay, thank you, Guy, and thank you, Mark. So this is the question and answer period. So as we talked about before, when called upon to speak, please provide your name for the record and your address. And we're going to try to limit it to about 5 minutes, so everyone gets a chance to speak, and then we can keep on going if necessary. So I'll open up. If there's any questions? No, right?
Chris Donovan, Boston Executive Helicopters. I'm at Gate 3 at the Norwood Airport, as everybody is familiar. I just want to reiterate what Mr. Ryan said. It's a great idea. If we could get the draft of the master plan out, it would help to be able to look at that, so we could get comments into Mr. McGuire before the May 10th deadline. That would really help. Just a couple of questions. There's been a lot of talk over the years about TOFAs and OFAs and all that stuff. How does a pilot know at the airport, and maybe the FAA can help with this, but how does a pilot know that there's a taxi lane or a taxiway and that there's certain standards, clearance standards? Is it the airport pavement markings? Or because it's not on the airport diagram, none of these taxiways or taxi lanes, so how does a pilot physically know that there is clearance, there isn't clearance, or is on a taxiway? Please.
Thank you.
It's a great question. So, yeah, to answer that, we're going to fully review the airport's, what used to be called the Airport Facility Directory, I believe now called the Chart Supplement. I don't know why after 30 years they changed it, but nonetheless they did. We want to make sure that that document has the proper remarks in there with the airport's master record, which is called the 5010 record. That's the first place that we want to look at and go to. The other thing too is we can put an FTC NOTAM on the airfield itself, so that the flying public can read all NOTAMs. They're supposed to, right? Become familiar with all available information pertinent to that flight, and they will be able to see a NOTAM that depicts a restricted use of the taxi lane to a certain wingspan, and we'll work with the FAA on that. I think that's logical. If it's not in place, we'll certainly make sure that it is.
Actually is in place.
It is, yeah.
It is.
So, thank you, Russ. So it is in place now. We want to review that, Chris, to make sure that, one, that it is, I'm sure it is accurate, but we'll have a look at that. Thank you for that.
I guess I still don't understand. So if if I'm a pilot or a pilot's there, I understand that there's restrictions at gate lane 2 and 3 right now, and that airport facility directory. But I always understood, and correct me if I'm wrong, that pavement markings tell the pilot what type of clearances he has. In other words, a solid line in the middle and a dash line on each side delineates if he's on a taxiway, taxi lane, et cetera. Is that true, or?
Sort of, okay. So, there's no different markings from a taxiway to a taxi lane. So the solid lines will kind of tell you where the edge is, and the dash lines will tell you where the center line is. So the markings will just really tell you where the aircraft can move within that piece of pavement. I think maybe you would think there's nothing that's going to tell you if there's an obstruction to an object-free area or a taxiway safety area. FAA's, from the Airports Division of FAA anyway, our goal for our standards is, as a pilot, you should not be worrying about anything but, staying on center line no matter what piece of pavement you're on. So we're asking airports to make sure that these clearance areas, if you will, don't have anything that's going to put harm in your way. But the markings are just the markings, like the runway's marked, the taxiway is marked, just the movement of the aircraft.
Yeah, because we have a situation, as everybody knows, at the airport, where we have some areas that, all the areas, or most areas, have the same type of marking. But some areas, we have a TOFA, OPA that applies, and some areas it doesn't. So I'm wondering how that works, where it's
So
in a pilot.
depending on the piece of pavement, it always applies, kind of like a runway safety area. As a pilot, you wouldn't know, quite frankly, if the TOFA or, the taxiway safety area or the OFA is there. It's something that we call like an imaginary protected surface. So it's not a piece of pavement, it's usually grass, and it just allows for operation to be free and clear of anything that could cause harm to the pilot and or damage to the aircraft.
Yeah, the issue we run into at airports, it's a great point. I mean, I started out in air traffic control, then I became a pilot, and it was very difficult for me. I just assumed everything was clear, right? So what I did learn, though, when I went to flight school is that the pilot is responsible, and I was also a designated pilot examiner for years. The pilot is responsible to become familiar with that information. The airport's master record, which goes into the chart supplement, and then there's FDC NOTAMs that are in place for this airport, specifically says these particular taxi lanes and has a wingspan restriction. So to Lisa's point, if a pilot does what the prudent pilot would do and read the NOTAMs and the airport facilities directory and become familiar, they would clearly know, and they've done a good job here, and I'm sure working with the FAA as well, to put these wingspan restrictions. Chris, the purpose of this exercise, though, is, yes, we recognize that there's restrictions, and we want to, in the next 3 to 5 years, find a way to lift those restrictions. And they've been well documented, well surveyed and marked now, and so these should become less, I hate to say restricted, but they become less restrictive, and then this will be updated as well.
One of the focuses of the technical master plan update was to try and address this issue, which we know is a problem at the airport. It's just not done quickly or easily, given that people are under lease agreements and there's buildings in places. So it's going to be a long-term plan. We can take steps. Some of the taxi lanes are easier to address than the others.
Thank you. Even the restrictions we have in place now are not being complied with. So in other words, we have restrictions on gate lane 2 and gate lane 3. We have that in the airport facility directory, but we have aircraft that operate in those areas that are applied to those aircraft. So it's kind of counterproductive to do that. My point is also that the primary ingress and egress for the fire department is those gates, gate 1, gate 2, and gate 3. So the FAA guidance specifically said that vehicle service road should be on a taxi lane and taxiway. So my point is why wouldn't it be easier to remove the toll restrictions on all those? In fact, that's what we've been negotiating with the airport commission. But would it, because it gives the pilot a false sense of security that he has taxiway clearance, and it's almost impossible, probably impossible, to remove all the obstacles in those two taxiways, or taxi lanes, whatever you want to call them. So Wouldn't it be easier if I could get at the north part of the airport to remove the pavement markings so the pilot wouldn't be under a false sense of security that he has obstacle clearance when he does it? And there's so many obstacles in there that it's gonna be almost impossible, short of like tearing down all the buildings.
Yeah, so the center line markings will remain. The current conditions of the airfield are what they are. And although in theory, I would agree with you, it would be easy to do it that way, but there is a center line, there is restrictions. A pilot that reads the NOTAMs and follows this would know, and they would go down at their own risk, whether they have the right wingspan or not, that's their own risk. But right now, there is adequate notification to the pilots that there are restrictions to the width. I think it would be good to keep the center lines where they are. I think they're going to shift a little bit, actually. When we're going to do a remarking. We'll have to do a remarking because, Chris, in some cases, to get them in between the buildings right now, just to have a design group one, they might even have to shift a foot or two in the next time there's a remarking. So you can say there's a design group one that goes down through. When we start going to the design group two, when we're able to do that and buildings are removed and leases are freed up, then the markings would be there, and then any restrictions that have to remain in the interim would just be reflected in the NOTAMs.
And you mentioned the south helipads, which just...
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
The south helipads?
Yes.
On the north helipad, which they put in a few years ago, because the circle itself is so far back, the tail of the aircraft is actually all over the swamp area. So I think that needs to be taken into consideration that, first of all, at Part 135, that should be a lit area. You can't depart or land on a helipad unless it's lit, and none of those are lit. There is a spotlight on the north portion, but not on the south portion. But when they first put those in, the north ones, I know the conservation agent was there. It would have been easier or better if they had just paved the whole area. I know they don't want to do impervious surfaces and all that, but it helps if instead of just putting a dot of tar, if they pave that whole area and push it back a little bit or move the circle forward, because a lot of times the tail is literally hanging out over. And then if you have snow and stuff, that creates another hazard out there as well. So
In those
Good-
cases,
good
we were
point.
able to, there were originally tie-down spaces over there that were paved. And so we were permitted by the conservation agency to repave those. So that's why they stayed in the same size and dimensions that they did. We weren't able to pave a whole strip over there.
in the CIP, the capital improvement plan, is there still all the other stuff that was in the 2007 master plan as far as land acquisitions and all that other stuff? Is that still incorporated into the master plan?
It is, yes. And, so bear in mind, Chris, when we were doing this master plan update, we were, it was an effort of, let's focus on the areas that are kind of different. And so, for instance, we didn't get too much into exactly that. It is still in there. It's in the previous. It still applies. This is an update to say, hey, these are some new things that we should consider.
And you know, I know you might not have done the plan itself, but you know the vehicle service access way. What exactly is that? Never heard of that. Is that going to be an easement between the west ramp and the DC3 ramp, or what's the purpose of that?
I think you're referring to where the fuel farm access is. There's tractor trailers that operate down through there.
But you depict it as going from the fuel farm area between the west ramp and the DC3 ramp all the way down to...
We're gonna talk about that. That shouldn't be the access for the
Right.
fuel farm.
That's right.
We saw that going from
Yeah,
north-south.
yeah, it's coming from the fuel farm and going through here.
Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
Yeah,
That's
no,
gonna change.
that's right. It will change.
And I was under the impression, maybe Mr. Black can help, that is the north-south taxi lane still exist, or is that gone?
It still exists.
It still exists.
Okay, because it's
Yeah.
not depicted on the airport diagram, none of it is, but...
No, taxi lanes are generally not on the AFD.
Okay.
All right, Chris, we'll get back to you. Just, John, you had a question.
John Cochran with the Norwood Airport Commission. On page 4, the taxi lane 2 plan, where we have this de-icing pad for collection.
Yep, alternative two?
Yeah.
Okay.
I see there you have a a net loss of 6 aircraft, of them, 6 tie downs? Or is it 3 tie downs for the centralized de-icing area and then 3 for the obstacle-free area?
So we're on alternative 3.
If you look at the, where it says decentralized icing, just to the right of that, in the notes, the arrows, it says 3 tie down removed, 3 tie downs removed on the north of that,
Yep.
Correct, yeah, it's very, so your question is, I'm sorry.
So my question is, are all 6 of those gonna go if we put the de-icing pad there? And then if you look at the next page, section 4, on drawing number F as Foxtrot, I'm sorry, the next page, Echo, where you have the aircraft wash ramp, it's showing a aircraft tie down in that area, and two aircraft tie downs there.
Yep.
Is that gonna be a net loss of 2 tie downs there as well?
No, so good question. So let me answer that first, because that's the easier one. If this were, in fact, if the airport were to have this as a wash area, it would enable, it has enough radius, it's got setback from everything where they could put a design group 2 aircraft in there and wash. Now, if the FBO were to do that, then they would move any aircraft that are tied down out of the way. They would tow them out of the way, do the wash, which would be infrequent. It's not all the time. And then they would put, so you'd still maintain tie downs there. The FBO would have to have the ability to be able to move the airplanes to do the wash.
Okay, that was the first part of my question.
Yes.
The second part is there any way that they can combine those 2 areas? So when you're washing an aircraft, it's generally warmer than freezing conditions,
Yeah.
and have it dual use. So we could have a collection of glycol for recycling after, when it's cold months, you're not gonna have somebody out there washing aircraft. And when in the warmer months, 8 months out of, maybe 4 months out of the year, they'll be, 5 months out of the year, they'll be doing de-icing, and the other 7 to 8 months out of the year, they'll be aircraft washing. Is it possible to combine those so that we don't have a net loss of 6 tie downs? As you know, that we need the tie downs for revenue.
Yep.
And I realize that the de-icing and the aircraft wash racks will generate income as well, but is there any way that we can combine both of those?
The same system.
No, different system.
Okay.
Depending on what you use for de-icing.
Just asking Mark if oil water separators can also double as a glycol collection, and
There's two separate
that's right,
seasons.
that's right. I understood. That's why I was just clarifying. I thought, how you answered was exactly how I thought. I just wanted to make sure. So, yes. So you'll see in the master plan as well, we did do a current review of the number of tie downs that are available versus how many are actually needed currently. And then compared that to what the forecasted level. And the net loss of the tie downs for the glycol collection system, because bear in mind, here's the other part, is even though there's glycol collection or there's a wet wash area, the tie downs would still remain. It's just that the FBO in certain, like during winter operations for de-ice, would have to move aircraft around just so they could do the glycol application. Same with wash. So there would be a little bit of responsibility moving aircraft around. To answer your question, so I don't think there'll be it's showing tie downs where the glycol pad would be. I think that for planning purposes, we would still have tie downs there, but where the object-free area is, clearly we can't have aircraft tie downs in the object-free area. So we can, it's a great comment. I think we have to revise the slide a little bit to show less loss of tie downs.
Okay. And also look at, can we use this as a dual use?
Okay.
Just so that we have one area for that both fit operations.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Anyone else? Pat?
Pat Fahey, Norwood Tower Manager. The proposal for Section 4, Taxiway Charlie, the new, making it a full-length parallel taxiway. You show the old taxiway being dug up essentially, possibly a solar farm. The label showing approximate wetland on the bottom left that shows impact 32,000 square feet covers up a portion of Charlie between 3.5 and Alpha. Would that also be closing, or would that remain open, that portion?
So Pat, what we're showing here, what we're depicting, and then I want to understand your question. So what we're depicting is realigning, obviously, as you can see, taxiway Charlie, and then having an opportunity to cross the runway and then enter onto the north-south taxi lane to go onto the movement area, okay, onto Alpha. So your question is what now?
So between Alpha, where the current taxiway Charlie comes out of the ramp,
Yep,
it goes between Alpha, comes out of the ramp, crosses taxiway Alpha, and then crosses runway 35.
Yep.
Would that portion out from the ramp to runway 35 remain, or
No.
would it be closed?
it would be removed,
It would be removed,
yes.
okay.
So there is an FAA requirement that you're not allowed to connect an apron directly to a runway through a parallel taxiway. Somehow pilots can get confused and mistake the runway for the parallel taxiway and start taxiwaying.
Which is why we're doing the offset for taxiway Delta here in the
Yep.
future.
Correct.
So we had done an EA earlier on, looking at potential alignments for taxiway Charlie and shifting a stub section, and we couldn't get it to go under one of those versions. We just ended up permitting the realignment of taxiway A and the shift of Delta. So this is revisiting that and trying to find another alternative.
So just to clarify that, we would lose the whole portion of Charlie between 3.5 and the ramp, or just the portion between Alpha and 3.5?
Just Alpha and 3.5, the stub.
Okay.
Right.
Yes, because we only have 2 access points, really. That would close down the whole north section of taxiway A. That would really impact airport operations.
The main reason for my question was because that label there blocks that.
Yeah,
it blocked it.
I can't
Hides it.
tell
Thank you.
what the plan was.
Oh, yeah.
And for 10 seconds, I will, because as an ATC guy, and I know Manchester had an issue years ago with reflectivity of solar. The FAA now has it's a reflectivity and a glare study that it's mandated before any and all solar work gets done. So we would, of course, if this were to move forward as a solar array on there, we would make sure that that happens, so that there's no blinding of the controllers.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Bob?
Bob Donald, 47 Minewell Street, from the Norwood Finance Commission as well, so I have an interest in the revenue reduction of the airport. You mentioned at one point the land that is under the control of another lease. I think that must be the DNA. What percentage of the total area is controlled, was under the lease with BMA? How much area do they control?
It's 1,100 feet long. What's the
300
width?
wide.
300 feet?
300 wide.
Yeah.
And in terms of the process for potential buyout of the lease, is that addressed in the master plan update or separately?
It is addressed.
It is addressed? Okay.
Yes. There's also a diagram that we put in there for property management, and it shows all of the property, and it labels it, and you'll see the 1,100-foot strip that's color-coded so that folks can see that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Anyone else?
Old East on 640 Deposit Street. You talked about the OFA and the TSA area for the design group 1 and 2 for the goal to be 79-foot wingspan. Are there any aircraft that currently utilize the airport that are 79 foot wide?
Yes. Yep.
What type of aircraft would those be?
So the Falcon 7X is the design group aircraft for the airfield. So it's Falcon 7X.
So Falcon 7X currently utilizes the Norwood Airport?
It has, you would know better, Russ.
I don't have any Falcon X's that are based there.
None based,
No.
but they've utilized it.
That I don't know.
Yeah, so it's rare. Now, bear in mind, so Russ would know better. He's there, boots on the ground. I'm not, obviously, as much. So the airport is, when you put a design group together, you look at a fleet mix of airplanes, and there's just a common characteristic of an airport or a group of airplanes. The Falcon 7X was chosen because it meets a kind of a group of airplanes that were approximately the same dimensions, same weight, and then from there, which is why the 7X was chosen. Whether or not it
Follow-up
frequent,
question, are there any hangars that could house a Falcon 7X at the airport? That would have a 79-foot or wider door?
I'd have to
That would
look.
be a question for the
Thanks.
FBO.
Yeah, I'll have to look, that's a good question, and we can get an answer for that.
Thank you.
Good.
In section 3,
Chris Donovan. Everyone, just state your name
First
every time.
from Boston Executive Helicopter.
Thank you.
In section 3, you have the fuel farm listed. I also have a fuel farm, it's not listed in there. Which brings me to the next point is, I welcome the opportunity to sit down with you guys. I had reached out to Jeff Adler in March of 2018 about the master plan update, and he said it was just a technical thing, he sent me an email, but nobody has met with me, and I do have a large facility at the north end of the airport with a fuel farm, hopefully going to be an FBO soon, so I'd welcome the opportunity to sit down with somebody and rather than waste everybody's time here, try to, express some ideas and stuff like that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris.
You can express your comments too, as we talked about, until May 10th.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful, if the master plan update was online, like Mr. Ryan said, it would
Yep.
really helpful on.
Yep. And I apologize for misspeaking. I was thinking we'd incorporate it, and you're absolutely right. I'm glad you called me on that. We're going to get that up this week, so that at least it's up there, but it is going to be labeled draft. So please know that comments we're going to collect until May 10th will be an addenda, and will go into the final master plan, so folks can see all the comments that came in. But the draft will be up there by the end of this week.
A couple of places on maps, we referenced the NFPA, the National Fire Protection Association standards. They don't apply to airports in Massachusetts, so is that, you know typical, but is that something that applies to the airport, or is that just a typical that you put on the engineering diagrams?
Well, I think we use it just as an overall standard when we're going to put together a airport and hangar development plan. You're right, in Massachusetts, not the standard, but when we start looking at, like, for instance, reciprocating aircraft hangar separation is 20 feet from the NFPA, and then you get to 50 feet for turbines. And so we're just trying to, when you go to lay out the hangars, to maximize the footprint, but also, have some standard at least, so that we can look at the overall footprint as a whole.
When you go from the 1,000 feet to the 500 feet,
Yep.
does the building restriction line shrink in as well?
It does.
Yeah.
It
So
does.
the 1,000 feet's only if you have vertical guidance. In this case, we have a localizer, so it's a non-precision approach. It goes to 500 feet. I think that was a long-term plan done in a master plan many years ago that had just sort of lingered there, but without the future of getting an actual vertical guidance, a glide slope antenna, we're going to go to 500 feet, and it allows significantly more development of building structures, hangars in apron areas right now.
And just to clarify, the vertical guidance, LPVs obviously have vertical guidance. We're talking about an actual ILS with a glide slope antenna. That's not looking very favorable for the airfield. The FAA is, they're moving more towards the vertically guided GPS LPV approaches.
Would we have to have that approach to go to the 500 feet, or
Nope.
go down?
You have the approach now.
You have GPS approaches.
Yeah, you have a
So
GPS.
we're all set?
That's right. Yep,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I'll say, Chris?
I'm good, Mr. Ryan. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been very helpful, hearing some of the comments. Like we said, recommend looking at the draft technical master plan update, sending your comments to Russ McGuire, and we're looking for May 10th, Friday, May 10th, to have those all in. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you.